So, I just want to address a few things with everyone. Before we compare the Unabomber Manifesto to the Palantir Manifesto, I wanted to start by talking about synchronicity. The word manifesto is not something I use or hear on a daily basis. So when I made a video about Ted Kaczynski and his manifesto, I had no idea that Palantir would release their own manifesto a few days later. So the odds of this being a coincidence are fairly low if you consider the spiritual subtext to all this. We are on the precipice of the end of the world and tribulation, and this topic is directly related to all of this. So if you haven't accepted Jesus into your life at this point, then you really need to make up your mind quickly, because your time is running out. God's plans are not the stuff of mice and men. Everything, including world events, and right down to the smallest detail, only relevant to you, is all by design. I suppose you could consider world events to be more dramatic examples of the Fibonacci sequence. So, this should make for an interesting case study. Later in this presentation, I will compare and contrast examples from the Unabomber Manifesto directly to the 22 points of the Palantir Manifesto. But for now, let's begin listening to Ted Kaczynski's warning about technology and the future. But suppose now that industrial society does survive the next several decades, and that the bugs do eventually get worked out of the system, so that it functions smoothly. What kind of system will it be? We will consider several possibilities. First, let us postulate that the computer scientists succeed in developing intelligent machines that can do all things better than human beings can do them. In that case, presumably, all work will be done by vast, highly organized systems of machines, and no human effort will be necessary. Either of two cases might occur. The machines might be permitted to make all of their own decisions without human oversight, or else human control over the machines might be retained. If the machines are permitted to make all their own decisions, we can't make any conjectures as to the results because it is impossible to guess how such machines might behave. We only point out that the fate of the human race would be at the mercy of the machines. It might be argued that the human race would never be foolish enough to hand over all power to the machines. But we are suggesting neither that the human race would voluntarily turn power over to the machines, nor that the machines would willfully seize power. What we do suggest is that the human race might easily permit itself to drift into a position of such dependence on the machines that it would have no practical choice but to accept all of the machines' decisions. As society and the problems that face it become more and more complex, and as machines become more and more intelligent, people will let machines make more and more of their decisions for them. Simply because machine-made decisions will bring better results than man-made ones. Eventually, a stage may be reached at which the decisions necessary to keep the system running will be so complex that human beings will be incapable of making them intelligently. At that stage, the machines will be in effective control. People won't be able to just turn the machines off because they will be so dependent on them that turning them off would amount to suicide. On the other hand, it is possible that human control over the machines may be retained. In that case, the average man may have control over certain private machines of his own, such as his car or his personal computer. But control over large systems of machines will be in the hands of a tiny elites, just as it is today, but with two differences. Due to improved techniques, the elite will have greater control over the masses. And because human work will no longer be necessary, the masses will be superfluous, a useless burden on the system. If the elite is ruthless, they may simply decide to exterminate the mass of humanity. If they are humane, they may use propaganda or other psychological or biological techniques to reduce the birth rate until the mass of humanity becomes extinct, leaving the world to the elite. Or if the elite consists of soft-hearted liberals, they may decide to play the role of good shepherds to the rest of the human race. They will see to it that everyone's physical needs are satisfied, that all children are raised under psychologically hygienic conditions, that everyone has a wholesome hobby to keep him busy, and that anyone who may become dissatisfied undergoes treatment to cure his problem. Of course, life will be so purposeless that people will have to be biologically or psychologically engineered either to remove their need for the power process or to make them sublimate their drive for power into some harmless hobby. These engineered human beings may be happy in such a society, but they most certainly will not be free. They will have been reduced to the status of domestic animals. But suppose now that the computer scientists do not succeed in developing artificial intelligence, so that human work remains necessary. Even so, machines will take care of more and more of the simpler tasks, so that there will be an increasing surplus of human workers at the lower levels of ability. We see this happening already. There are many people who find it difficult or impossible to get work, because for intellectual or psychological reasons, they cannot acquire the level of training necessary to make themselves useful in the present system. On those who are employed, ever-increasing demands will be placed. They will need more and more training, more and more ability, and will have to be ever more reliable, conforming, and docile, because they will be more and more like cells of a giant organism. Their tasks will be increasingly specialized, so that their work will be, in a sense, out of touch with the real world, being concentrated on one tiny slice of reality. The system will have to use any means that it can, whether psychological or biological, to engineer people to be docile, to have the abilities that the system requires, and to sublimate their drive for power into some specialized task. But the statement that the people of such a society will have to be docile may require qualification. The society may find competitiveness useful, provided that ways are found of directing competitiveness into channels that serve the needs of the system. We can imagine a future society in which there is endless competition for positions of prestige and power. But no more than a very few people will ever reach the top, where the only real power is. Very repellent is a society in which a person can satisfy his need for power only by pushing large numbers of other people out of the way and depriving them of their opportunity for power. One can envision scenarios that incorporate aspects of more than one of the possibilities that we have just discussed. For instance, it may be that machines will take over most of the work that is of real, practical importance, but that human beings will be kept busy by being given relatively unimportant work. It has been suggested, for example, that a great development of the service industries might provide work for human beings. Thus, people would spend their time shining each other's shoes, driving each other around in taxicabs, making handicrafts for one another, waiting on each other's tables, etc. This seems to us a thoroughly contemptible way for the human race to end up, and we doubt that many people would find fulfilling lives in such pointless busy work. They would seek other, dangerous outlets, drugs, crime, cults, hate groups, unless they were biologically or psychologically engineered to adapt them to such a way of life. Needless to say, the scenarios outlined above do not exhaust all the possibilities. They only indicate the kinds of outcomes that seem to us most likely. But we can envision no plausible scenarios that are any more palatable than the ones we've just described. It is overwhelmingly probable that if the industrial technological system survives the next 40 to 100 years, it will by that time have developed certain general characteristics. Individuals, at least those of the bourgeois type, who are integrated into the system and make it run, and who therefore have all the power, will be more dependent than ever on large organizations. They will be more socialized than ever, and their physical and mental qualities to a significant extent, possibly to a very great extent, will be those that are engineered into them, rather than being the results of chance, or of God's will, or whatever. And whatever may be left of wild nature will be reduced to remnants, preserved for scientific study, and kept under the supervision and management of scientists. Hence, it will no longer be truly wild. In the long run, say a few centuries from now, it is likely that neither the human race nor any other important organisms will exist as we know them today. Because once you start modifying organisms through genetic engineering, there is no reason to stop at any particular point, so that the modifications will probably continue until man and other organisms have been utterly transformed. Whatever else may be the case, it is certain that technology is creating for human beings a new physical and social environment, radically different from the spectrum of environments to which natural selection has adapted the human race, physically and psychologically. If man is not adjusted to this new environment by being artificially re-engineered, then he will be adapted to it through a long and painful process of natural selection. The former is far more likely than the latter. It would be better to dump the whole stinking system and take the consequences. And that was an excerpt from the Unabomber Manifesto that was predicting the future back in January of 1995. So basically, the Unabomber warned us all about the dangers we were headed toward with technology. But the Palantir Manifesto says the opposite of this. According to the Palantir Manifesto, we are in danger if we do not embrace technology. So we will listen to all of the 22 points of the Palantir Manifesto, explain them, and present a retort from points made in the Unabomber Manifesto. So let's compare both manifestos. Point number 1. Silicon Valley owes a moral debt to the country that made its rise possible. The engineering elite of Silicon Valley has an affirmative obligation to participate in the defense of the nation. This first point seems like Palantir is trying to justify unethical lines they have crossed in usurping power by claiming that waving the American flag makes it all okay. And in retort to that, the Unabomber Manifesto states in return that nationalism is a great promoter of technology, meaning that technology, which he sees as a bad thing, is advanced by nationalism. Point number 2 from the Palantir Manifesto. We must rebel against the tyranny of the apps. Is the iPhone our greatest creative, if not crowning achievement as a civilization? The object has changed our lives, but it may also now be limiting and constraining our sense of the possible. Now, at first, it seems like they on your side being critical of smartphone addiction. But what they are really saying is that Palantir is declaring war on consumer technology, so it can replace it with militarized government technology, which is far more dangerous. A line from the Unabomber Manifesto, which seems to retort this, is the following. To begin with, the Unabomber says, the technophiles are taking us all on an utterly reckless ride into the unknown. So Kaczynski makes no distinction between private companies and the government. So he would not have liked the iPhone, but he would not have trusted Palantir either. In light of this, has also said in his manifesto, the line of conflict should be drawn between the mass of the people and the power-holding elite of industrial society, politicians, scientists, upper-level business executives, government officials, etc. So from the Unabomber's point of view, the people should be against both of them. Point number 3. Free email is not enough. The decadence of our culture or civilization, and indeed its ruling class, will be forgiven only if that culture is capable of delivering economic growth and security for the public, which to me implies that Palantir will be in control of finance, as well as national security. Palantir is involved with the war with Iran, and their services are also already tied to the banks. In regards to the growing ability of Palantir to control national defense as well as the country's finances, the Unabomber said, and generally speaking, local autonomy should tend to increase, because lack of advanced technology and rapid communications will limit the capacity of governments or other large organizations to control local communities. So this suggests Kaczynski's opposition to a technology corporation controlling the citizens or local communities. Point number 4. The limits of soft power, of soaring rhetoric alone, have been exposed. The ability of free and democratic societies to prevail requires something more than moral speech. It requires hard power, and hard power in this century will be built on software. It means that persuasive ideals and inspiring speeches aren't enough on their own anymore. Real influence now depends on tangible capabilities. And in today's world, those capabilities are increasingly rooted in software, digital infrastructure, and technological systems, rather than just traditional military or economic strength. Retorts from the Unabomber Manifesto are the following. It is not possible to reform the system in such a way as to prevent it from depriving people of dignity and autonomy. The continued development of technology will worsen the situation. We're going to argue that industrial technological society cannot be reformed in such a way as to prevent it from progressively narrowing the sphere of human freedom. And how many times have we heard about safety and security as they take away our freedoms? Number 5, the question is not whether AI weapons will be built. It is who will build them and for what purpose. Our adversaries will not pause to indulge in theatrical debates about the merits of developing technologies with critical military and national security applications. They will proceed. In other words, if we won't be the first to bring on Skynet, then someone else will. To which the Unabomber Manifesto replies, "The revolution must be international and worldwide. It cannot be carried out on a nation-by-nation basis." Whenever it is suggested that the United States, for example, should cut back on technological progress or economic growth, people get hysterical and start screaming that if we fall behind in technology, the Japanese will get ahead of us. Holy robots, the world will fly off its orbit if the Japanese ever sell more cars than we do. Nationalism is a great promoter of technology. More reasonably, it is argued that if the relatively democratic nations of the world fall behind in technology, while nasty, dictatorial nations like China, Vietnam, and North Korea continue to progress, eventually the dictators may come to dominate the world. That is why the industrial system should be attacked in all nations simultaneously, to the extent that this may be possible. And now for number 6. National service should be a universal duty. We should, as a society, seriously consider moving away from an all-volunteer force and only fight the next war if everyone shares in the same risk and the cost. So basically, Palantir wants to sign us all up for a war, even though Trump avoided the draft. Trust me, the elites will never be drafted, no matter what they say. And the retort from the Unabomber Manifesto would be, the system does not and cannot exist to satisfy human needs. Instead, it is human behavior that has to be modified to fit the needs of the system. If the system breaks down, the consequences will still be very painful. But the bigger the system grows, the more disastrous the results of its breakdown will be. That aligns with the idea that tolerance disappears when systems stop delivering security or stability. So people will only tolerate war to a point. But regardless, Palantir technology can track down deserters with AI that can autonomously terminate them. And now, for number 7, if a US Marine asks for a better rifle, we should build it, and the same goes for software. We should, as a country, be capable of continuing a debate about the appropriateness of military action abroad while remaining unflinching in our commitment to those who have asked to stand into harm's way. So, Kaczynski's reply would be, once a technical innovation has been introduced, people usually become dependent on it. The new technology changes society in such a way that people eventually find themselves forced to use it. So, he'd likely interpret build a better rifle or better military software as part of an unstoppable cycle. Each improvement deepens dependence and raises the stakes. And now for number 8. Public servants need not be our priests. Any business that compensated its employees in the way that the federal government compensates public servants would struggle to survive. Well, I don't know where he is getting this information from, but there have been a lot of layoffs in tech companies. Just look at Amazon. And government workers are well paid for what they do already. But perhaps they are planning on starting a new branch of government with his henchmen running it. Anyway, the Unabomber reply to this would be, The system does not and cannot exist to satisfy human needs. It is human behavior that has to be modified to fit the needs of the system. So instead of arguing about whether public servants are overpaid or underperforming, he'd say the entire bureaucratic technological system, including government agencies, exists for its own maintenance, not for people. Number 9. We should show far more grace towards those who have subjected themselves to public life. The eradication of any space for forgiveness, a jettisoning of any tolerance for the complexities and contradictions of the human psyche, may leave us with a cast of characters at the helm we will grow to regret. Characters at the helm means political leaders, so we are supposed to feel bad for the charlatans who, as they take their real orders from secret societies to destroy the West. Anyway, the Unabomber reply from his own manifesto would be, the kind of revolution we have in mind will not necessarily involve an armed uprising against any government. It may or may not involve physical violence, but it will not be a political revolution. Its focus will be on technology and economics, not politics. So he saw technology as the greater evil than the people who are in positions of power. So this makes me think about the beast system, which gives the ruling class its power. And now for number 10. The psychologization of modern politics is leading us astray. Those who look to the political arena to nourish their soul and sense of self, who rely on their internal life finding expression in people they may never meet, will be left disappointed. To which Ted Kaczynski would reply from his manifesto, people engage in surrogate activities because they are unable to satisfy their needs for power through normal activities. He'd likely say your quote is basically right. Looking to politics to nourish the soul is misguided. So this is actually something they would agree on. Number 11. Our society has grown too eager to hasten and is often gleeful at the demise of its enemies. The vanquishing of an opponent is a moment to pause, not rejoice. To which the Unabomber would reply, in the meantime there will be great suffering. So it is not at all clear that the survival of industrial society would involve less suffering than the breakdown of that society would. Technology has gotten the human race into a fix from which there is not likely to be any easy escape. Even if the breakdown is gradual enough so that reduction of the population can occur more through lowering of the birth rate than through elevation of the death rate. The process of deindustrialization probably will be very chaotic and involve much suffering. So in this comparison, the Unabomber seems to suggest that some level of suffering and death is inevitable, but he seems to imply that the ends justify the means, which makes sense when you remember he killed 3 people. So I think for Kaczynski to rejoice or to regret would be out of character for him. I think that as a math expert, he would simply see this all as just another math problem. I think there was a side to him that was very cold and calculating. But you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so it is complicated. And now for number 12. No other country in the world has advanced progressive values more than this one. The United States is far from perfect, but it's easy to forget how much more opportunity exists in this country for those who are hereditary elites than in any other nation on the planet. Progressive is similar to words like liberal or leftist. So, the Unabomber's reply from his manifesto would have been, almost everyone will agree that we live in a deeply troubled society. One of the most widespread manifestations of the craziness of our world is leftism. So a discussion of the psychology of leftism can serve as an introduction to the discussion of the problems of modern society in general. So Kaczynski saw progressive values as a bad thing. Number 13. The atomic age is ending. One age of deterrence, the atomic age, is ending, and a new age of deterrence built on AI is set to begin. To which Kaczynski would reply from his manifesto, many modern people, on the other hand, are disturbed by the prospect of physical deterioration and death, as is shown by the amount of effort they expend trying to maintain their physical condition, appearance, and health. We argue that this is due to unfulfillment resulting from the fact that they have never put their physical powers to any practical use, have never gone through the power process using their bodies in a serious way. It is not the primitive man, who has used his body daily for practical purposes, who fears the deterioration of age, but the modern man who has never had a practical use for his body beyond walking from his car to his house. It is the man whose need for the power process has been satisfied during his life who is best prepared to accept the end of that life. So for a primitive man, there is no such thing as an external deterrence, as long as he has lived his life with purpose. Number 14. American power has made possible an extraordinary long peace. Too many have forgotten, or perhaps take for granted, that nearly a century of some version of peace has prevailed in the world without a great power military conflict. At least 3 generations, billions of people, and their children and now grandchildren have never known a world war. To which Ted Kaczynski might reply, be saying something like, the absence of world war doesn't mean the absence of conflict. Violence, coercion, and control still exist, just in different forms. Not purely positive achievement, but part of a system that trades freedom for order. Number 15. The post-war neutering of Germany and Japan must be undone. The defanging of Germany was an overcorrection, for which Europe is now paying a heavy price. A similar and highly theatrical commitment to Japanese pacifism will, if maintained, also threaten to shift the balance of power in Asia. But in the Unabomber Manifesto, we have the following. Whenever it is suggested that the United States, for example, should cut back on technological progress or economic growth, people get hysterical and start screaming that if we fall behind in technology, the Japanese will get ahead of us. So from the Unabomber's point of view, he was not concerned with building back up other countries. Kaczynski's was more with tearing down technology across the world. Number 16. We should applaud those who attempt to build where the market has failed to act. The culture almost snickers at Musk's interest in grand narrative, as if billionaires ought to simply stay in their lane of enriching themselves. Any curiosity or genuine interest in the value of what he has created is essentially dismissed, or perhaps lurks from beneath a thinly veiled scorn. This tells me that they are not done using Elon Musk, and this point acts as if the market is not controlled by the Rothschild bloodline. Nevertheless, the Unabomber, in his manifesto, said, nature makes a perfect counter-ideal to technology for several reasons. Nature, that which is outside the power of the system, is the opposite of technology, which seeks to expand indefinitely the power of the system. So he would say that the market, as well as Elon Musk's endeavors within that context, are just part of a system that needs to be replaced by reverting back to a simpler life in nature, where there is no need for a financial market. Number 17. Silicon Valley must play a role in addressing violent crime. Many politicians across the United States have essentially shrugged when it comes to violent crime, abandoning any serious efforts to address the problem or take any risk with their constituencies or donors in coming up with solutions and experiments in what should be a desperate bid to save lives. This last bit of propaganda reminds me of RoboCop, when the robot police weapon malfunctioned and started killing people in a board meeting. This is Alex Karp's way of brainwashing people about how Palantir and its systems are linked to the military and the police. So the Unabomber was not a completely decent person either. I don't want to paint a picture of him with rose-colored glasses on. I mean, he did take the lives of 3 people, and in some instances, he almost sounds like Bill Gates and others when it comes to callous and cold outlook regarding the lives of other people. So in light of this topic of saving lives, he said things like the following. And the important problem is to get rid of the industrial system, because once the industrial system is gone, the world's population necessarily will decrease, whereas if the industrial system survives, it will continue developing new techniques of food production that may enable the world's population to keep increasing almost indefinitely. Number 18. The ruthless exposure of the private lives of public figures drives far too much talent away from government service. the public arena, and the shallow and petty assaults against those who dare to do something other than enrich themselves has become so unforgiving that the Republic is left with a significant roster of ineffectual, empty vessels, whose ambition one would forgive if there were any genuine belief structure lurking within. In my opinion, this is yet again more propaganda to cover up how closely tied Palantir is to politics and the current administration. But as I stated previously, the Unabomber's intended revolution had nothing to do with politics, which he would consider just another cog in the machine of this techno-industrial culture. In Kaczynski's mind, once the technology is removed from the equation, the rest of the power structure would collapse that was enslaving humanity. In other words, the beast system cannot function without its technology. Number 9, teen. The caution in public life that we unwittingly encourage is corrosive. Those who say nothing wrong often say nothing much at all. You gotta wonder if this was Alex Karp self-congratulating himself for writing this Palantir Manifesto while trying to pre-defend himself. Number 20. The pervasive intolerance of religious belief in certain circles must be resisted. The elite's intolerance of religious belief is perhaps one of the most telling signs that its political project constitutes a less open intellectual movement than many within would claim. And at least on the surface, this statement would find some shallow and yet common ground in the acknowledgement of the belief in a supreme being. As Kaczynski went on to say in his Unabomber Manifesto, and with wild nature we include human nature, by which we mean those aspects of the functioning of the human individual that are not subject to regulation by organized society, but are products of chance or free will or God. But where the Unabomber was describing how the evidence for God could be found in nature, but Alex Karp was alluding to how belief in God could be found in technology, which brings to mind the solid-state intelligence that John C. Lilly envisioned on Ket Amin. And the word intolerance, in reference to religion, seems to imply a coming digital God that tolerates all the major religions of the world into a one-world religious belief system, sold to the world as tolerance. So wake up. Number 21. Some cultures have produced vital advances. Others remain dysfunctional and regressive. All cultures are now equal. Criticism and value judgments are forbidden. Yet this new dogma glosses over the fact that certain cultures, and indeed subcultures, have produced wonders. Others have proven middling and worse, regressive and harmful. Anyway, this last point from the Palantir Manifesto reminds me that there are a lot of words used in Palantir Manifesto which have religious connotations. For example, priest, dogma, forbidden, and more. It feels like there is a Luciferian subtext to all this. In any event, in regards to the word regressive that is used here, the Unabomber wanted us all to regress back to a simpler culture that has liberated itself from technology. So from the Unabomber Manifesto, we get the following. An argument likely to be raised against our proposed revolution is that it is bound to fail, because it is claimed throughout history, technology has always progressed, never regressed. Hence, technological regression is impossible. But this claim is false. Number 22. We must resist the shallow temptation of a vacant and hollow pluralism. We, in America, and more broadly the West, have for the past half-century resisted defining national cultures in the name of inclusivity. But inclusion into what? To me, this sounds like a criticism of slogans like, "Diversity makes us stronger." So, maybe they are setting the stage for a civil war of some kind. Or perhaps they are laying down the construction for a future trap for many patriots and conservatives. In any event, the Unabomber's retort from his manifesto would be the following. But the way to discourage ethnic conflict is not through militant advocacy of minority rights. Instead, the revolutionaries should emphasize that although minorities do suffer more or less disadvantage, this disadvantage is of peripheral significance. Our real enemy is the industrial technological system and in the struggle against the system, ethnic distinctions are of no importance. Also, unlike the Palantir Manifesto's supposed focus on America, the Unabomber Manifesto was more interested in a worldwide revolution against technology. And now, in closing, I have some final thoughts. My goal here was to compare and contrast the Unabomber Manifesto with the Palantir Manifesto. The Unabomber wanted to destroy technology, which he saw as a great force for evil for the entire world, while the Palantir Manifesto reads like propaganda intended to advocate for technology. So I thought this would make for an interesting study in comparing the two. One of the similarities between them is that both Palantir and the Unabomber had experiences with the CIA. The CIA groomed Peter Thiel to become what he has become. So to me, Palantir is just by proxy, an extension of the Central Intelligence Agency. But Ted Kaczynski, aka the Unabomber, was a victim of MK-Ultra mind control experiments by the CIA. So this leads to more questions for a later time to investigate. Also, I wanted to say that while I agree with many of the things that Ted Kaczynski has said, that doesn't mean I think he was the kind of person we should all place on a pedestal. There were aspects of his character that I think are troubling. But the truth doesn't always follow a nice, even path. It is a journey that takes you through many twists and turns indeed. But at the end of the day, you have to keep an open mind and allow the evidence to take you wherever they lead you to. And I pray in Jesus' name that the path you are on leads you back to Christ.